So now we're going to take a look at how to make a visually appealing and supportive document for your students. So what I did is I found this document online about this science experiment of melting chocolate going from a solid to a liquid. And this is what the unadapted form of it looks like. And you can see right away there's a lot of words on the page. um, I mean, there's some numbering on the side, but for a student who speaks English as a second language, this amount of text with no visuals and so many words, so little spacing between them is very concerning, and it's something that students would feel a shock looking at this document that's completely unadapted like this. So there's a couple of considerations of what to do when you're adapting a document like this. And so I made a note of some of these considerations. So the first thing you want to do is you want to set a clear goal or purpose for students as they're reading your document. That's going to drive the reading that they're doing, and it'll make the document much more understandable for them. And so I've already made an adapted copy of this document, and I'm going to talk you through the changes I made. So here's my adapted copy. And so to meet that criteria of always setting a clear goal or purpose for reading, I put an objective right at the very top of that material. So the objective is to discover at what temperature chocolate goes from a solid to a liquid. And you can see I put the word temperature in bold so that students will know that's a word that's going to be in my word bank. And the word bank words should be words that you're explicitly teaching your students that they can look at and refer back to in their binders or wherever you're keeping their vocabulary words. The next thing we want to do is we want to reduce unnecessary text. And as you can see, there's a ton of text on this unadapted document. And so I'm going to show you a couple of ways that I thought of how I could reduce it. So right away in the beginning of the document, I put the word bank in and I went straight to what you'll need. Since I already set an objective for students at the top, it was redundant and unnecessary to have this whole intro here, enjoy the simple melting chocolate experiment for kids. It was just not necessary. I could go straight to what you'll need to keep it simple and visually appealing for students. You'll also notice that I reduced the amount of text in terms of what they'll need. I cut this part about chocolate bar squares or chocolate chips, and I also included a visual with each of the pieces of material that the students will need, and I put some extra spacing there so it doesn't seem too overwhelming for students. And that hits number 4 here, which is including visuals that support meaning for students. So small chocolate pieces, the students will see that in this visual. They'll see the paper plates and pen and paper to record their results. And these are images that you can just find straight off of Google. All right. And then next, I go into my instructions. You can see the way they set up their instructions here. They try to make it a little bit more accommodated by having them numbered, but there's not much spacing between the instructions here, and it's a lot of text all in one spot for students to try to sort through, which makes it challenging. So remembering to give generous spacing and including visuals that support meaning, I spaced out the instructions and I put the steps that students would need to follow in each step. So put one piece of chocolate on a paper plate and put it outside in the shade. I try to model that with students with these visuals here to record how long it takes for the chocolate to melt. If the chocolate doesn't melt in 10 minutes, describe if the chocolate is soft or hard. And then repeat the process of a piece of chocolate on a plate that you put outside in direct sunlight and record your results in the same way. Again, simply trying to make this as visual as possible for students. One of the things we should talk about as well is limited but appropriate use of bolding, capitalization, or highlights. So there are some words that students will absolutely need you to draw their attention to, like direct sunlight, when the sunlight is hitting the chocolate directly. That's something that they might be unfamiliar with, and it's a word that you'll need to give the explanation to them in class prior to them doing this assignment. And the bolding just helps remind them that this is a word that was covered in class or a word that you included in your word bank, and maybe you have a vocabulary sheet for those words separate. It's important though that not everything is highlighted or put in bold because then these pieces that are important won't stick out for students. And then what I also did as we go through this document, you'll notice that at some points when appropriate, I changed the sentence and word complexity. So you can see at this part, compare your results. So you can see in the original, it said, compare your results and what conditions of the chocolate melt. You might also like to record the temperatures of the locations you used using a thermometer so you can think about what temperature chocolate melts at. So this last piece here, I simplified the language for students. I simply said record the temperatures of the locations you used using a thermometer, included an image for that, and then just put one question: at what temperature did your chocolate melt at? It's also important to point out here that this sheet, if this was something you wanted your students to answer on, you would want to give them sentence starters. I'm assuming here that this person gave them one separate document just for students to see the instructions, and then gave them another document that had the questions and the sentence starters for students. So this is one example of how you go from a document that is unadapted and not visually appealing and supportive to students to one that's much more visually appealing and much more supportive for students.